In today's episode of the Impertinent Collector, we're gonna talk about gold, jewellery, and the Roman Empire. But not before we are confronted by an ethical dilemma. Yes, because would you leave your 10 years old son home alone with a stranger that is known to be an eccentric intellectual of dubious moral standing, if some commercial gain could be obtained by the transaction? Well, for my mom, the answer was a resounding yes. And that's why one morning she called me from London and she said, my flight will be back in Venice by 6 p.m. and by 7 I should be back home. But I need you to keep company to a merchant that is coming from Rome for a few hours until I arrive, because he has some stuff to show me that I want to see before anybody else. And that was the deal. Now, I immediately put up some resistance, but my mom had the key that unlocked all sort of doors through the years. She offered me 10,000 lira, the equivalent of $100 these days. And those 10,000 liras have remove opposition from all sort of people, starting with myself and my sister, when we have to do some sort of service for my mom, and we were already saying no, really, this 10,000 lira was the magic word that would make us reluctantly to agree to whatever the deal was. Now, that is what unlocked the door around 2 p.m. to this shady character by the name of Emmanuel. Somebody that I met before in Rome a couple of times, but imagine when I was 9, 10 years old, and that for what I could remember, it was ugly, smelly, he dressed up like a shepherd, and most importantly, had zero personality. And yes, you would excuse the 10 years old me for a touch of arrogance and, of course, ignorance, immaturity, and lack of understanding in terms of the basics of the law of attraction, what charisma is all about. And as for the poor Emanuele that I so quickly labeled, well, he probably wasn't an Adonis. He probably wasn't the guy with the perfect body and the perfect features. But I've always seen him through the years, surrounded by young, much younger than him, beautiful women who could wait for every little word that he said. Smelly? No, he wasn't smelly. He was always using the latest fragrances. And as for his look, he might have been shabby to me, but in reality, he was sophisticated, shabby chic, and he was always a trendsetter. He was always ahead, and you always wear super expensive leather And this leather had a particular musty smell that if you are not experienced, you could sort of like misguidedly think that is like animal smell. But the guy in reality had an impeccable look in which he put a lot of attention. And finally, for the personality that I thought he didn't have, I was coming from a family, certainly on my mom's side, of screaming monkeys, where no matter how good your argument is, somebody in the family will go against you just to test your conviction. And then at the end, it becomes a match of chest-beating gorillas. While in the case of Emanuele, was a man of few words, of calibrated words, and where everything had a meaning specific to his own word. He was, as a matter of fact, an absolutely gem of an intellectual with an encyclopedic knowledge that had opened the doors of all other intellectuals that were circulating around Rome in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And in fact, he knew them all personally. He knew Fellini the way he knew Pasolini. He knew Michelangelo Antonioni the way he knew Bernardo Bertolucci. He knew Sergio Leone, but he knew also Nino Rota and all the other fantastic composers that were part of the jet set of the Roma, of the Dolce Vita of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, down to the 90s. But Emanuele also knew all the industrialists, all the collectors, all the buyers. He knew the politicians, he knew the cardinals, he knew the aristocrats. He had access to the houses where the most private collections were kept, and his expertise was sought after by all sorts of people because he had unbelievable knowledge that went beyond the academic control of the subject matter. He had something that we in Italian we call the sensibilità, a sensitivity that would help him to correctly identify all sorts of masterpieces where there was some uncertainty. And so that afternoon, I got to spend it with him for the first time, me and him alone, when I was 10 and he was already in his late 40s. And I have to say to you, I never married, I don't have children. And there is always some sort of a discomfort in dealing with children when I find myself socially with the kids of my friends. Because there is a certain inquisitive nature, there is like an ability in being direct, there is a curiosity that I myself had when I was a kid, but that as an adult I learned to control, especially in the context of the Anglo-Saxon world where I lived for the last nearly 30 years. You don't ask personal questions, and anything is a personal question. And if you progress within the corporate world, even within your colleagues, you can find yourself in trouble. I remember a funny episode of a colleague from America of Italian background who was reported to HR because he said to a colleague was cooking good looking, and she took him to HR for sexual harassment. Unbelievable. And so you don't ask questions. Well, kids don't have these filters. They ask you, are you married? Why don't you have children? Where do you sleep? Oh, when are you going back to Italy? What about your parents? And fun enough, I was that kid myself when I spent the afternoon with Emmanuel. But I've also learned all this money dealing that was happening within my mom business. And whilst my dad had a corporate career, with my mom there was always cash, there were always promises, there were always borrowing and lending. And so I remember vividly, as I offered Emanuele a coffee, and I made him a coffee with a traditional mocha, I said to him, look, Emanuele, my mom asked me to entertain you and to keep you busy until she arrives. And you know what? She promised me 10,000 lira for the service. But I think I have a deal for you. I don't really know if my mom would give me the 10,000 lira, and my mom always did. But you know, I think that I could borrow 10,000 lira from you, and then when my mom arrives, we get it from her. That way, there is no risk for me in entertaining you. He didn't even flinch, and he opened a leather pouch that he had on the back of his trousers. And this pouch was filled with cash. And poor Emanuele, through the years, this guy would have money like no others. And he was in debt like no others. He could try to sell and negotiate for hundreds of thousands of dollars of artwork. And there were occasions where he actually drove from Rome to our own city in order to get 500,000 lira from my mom, 500,000, just to get by for an extra couple of weeks. And he was a man of extraordinary generosity and who understood the value of money. But among many other qualities, he was a scholar that had zero interest in gossip, triviality, you name it. And therefore, he really was way more at ease to be in my company than I was to be in his company. Besides, I had just collected my 10,000 lira. So now the risk to me was zero. I just have to, pay my part of the bargain. That was the entertainment. But this is what happened. I asked him, of course, are you married? You never married? Why you don't have children? Where do you live? Why are you here? Where are you going? How did you get into the business? Why you specialize in anything? All sort of questions, a barrage of questions. And I could tell that some of the questions were a little bit, over the line. But also, he himself, like myself now, wasn't used to deal with kids. And I was highly socialized. So, and I was in my home. So I had no, no way to sort of keep for myself my curiosity. I had a question, I ask a question. And that has always been my policy when I was a kid. Then I learned that sometimes it's better not to ask. And sometimes also I learned that observation is more important than a direct question. But what happened that afternoon is that Emanuele showed me some of the items that he was bringing to a collector in Geneva. And the fact that he was passing by is because he was taking a train they were starting from Venice, they would then go to Milan and then from Milan to Geneva. And the train was leaving at 10 p.m. and my mom locked him in just to see what he had. And so you always have these soft leather bags when there was a mix of clothes, other stuff, cash, but all sort of stuff very nicely packed. And so that afternoon he showed me Roman glass and he talked to me about glass during the Roman Empire and what happened and the trade. He showed me some small statuettes that they were possibly coming from southern Italy, Sicily, Magna Graecia, and therefore even pre-Roman Empire. Because one of the most extraordinary markets that you can have in Italy, of all the places around the world, is the black market of antiquity. And you are dealing with a specific category of people called the tombaroli. And these tombaroli are the tomb diggers. And there is a hierarchy. Well, you got the people who dig, but you got the people who are specialized, and there are the people who get to see the stuff first. And then there are the people who know the collectors. And across Europe, it's not only in Italy, but in Switzerland, in France, in Germany, in England, in Israel, there are all sort of artifacts that, despite the fact of being 100% genuine, they have a huge problem, what is known as provenance. And add to this the fact that in Italy, anything that is over 250 years old is subject to the control of the state, the Italian state. So not only you need to declare it, you need to declare it that you have it in your possession. In some cases, you can't move it outside Italy. All sort of issues. Emanuele was the man who was trusted to go inside the houses of these collectors, these villas. I remember the following year, we went to this villa outside Rome on the Via Appia of a very famous Italian industrialist. And he had all sort of Roman statues, and he had all sort of stuff. And he was going through precious stones and books and other artifacts, and I was there with my mom and with Emanuele. And I remember asking, but is this stuff real? Is all this stuff genuine? And a moment of silence crept into the room, and they all looked, and he says who is this little idiot that is asking this question? And Emanuele was there, could take you everywhere. And so I had the most incredible afternoon with him. Then my mom arrived, we took him out for dinner, and then back to the station where he left for Switzerland when he had to meet this other secretive collector. So that was the world of Emanuele, and my mom had a direct line with Emanuele for a very long time, until, with a great dismay, my Auntie Julie became the partner of Emanuele. And of course my mom didn't like that, because now she had to go through Auntie Julie in order to know where Emanuele was. And Auntie Julie also wasn't the one into gossiping, in telling my mom what he was after, what he was doing. So my mom was terribly frustrated that she had to negotiate with Julie for access to Emanuele. And so this is how all these things got together. But now imagine my surprise when, few years ago, my Auntie Julie, once she found out, and I was in Italy, that I was now working within the diamond industry, she said to me, "You might have a client for something that I got from Emanuele 30 or 40 years ago." Incredible. And I said, like, show me. And so what he did, she showed me this gold necklace that now, of course, has been restrained, that is of Roman origins, and is all these very delicate and hollow golden spheres with this sculpture here and some rock crystal. And you have to understand that this fascination with jewelry, with antique jewelry, started again somehow towards the end of the 18th century, so 1780, 1790, where stuff starting to emerge in great quantities from the pits of ashes of Pompei, because the people there were trapped with eruption, and what they did, as they were trying to flee, they got the whole jewelry together. And so whenever they could find a body, in most cases you could find jewelry, because you have to consider that Pompeii at the time was a mix of Monte Carlo merging with Dubai. Everybody was everybody, had a villa there, and you have to display your social status. And if you go and visit Pompeii now, and you get to see how they brought the outside nature within the court inside their own villa with this incredible fresco, you get a sense of what it is. But this connection between the Roman Empire, and you have to understand, at the time of the Roman Empire, gold was extremely rare, much more rare than it is now, because now gold is mined like in South Africa in great quantities, across Africa in great quantities, across South America in great quantities, and like in Australia itself, they have huge deposit of gold. But back, you know, during the Greek time, the Phoenician times, gold was extremely rare. There were few superficial deposits in the south of Egypt, and a few superficial deposits in Germany that they ran out very, very quickly. And so gold was the ultimate status symbol to display. And obviously our fascination with gold that goes back to the Egyptian pharaohs is the fact that gold does not oxidize. And so this color that you'll see here is the original color that the person who wore it, apart from my Auntie Julie, had back at the time. And what if this has escaped Pompei? What if this necklace was certainly part of somebody with huge status? And so when I had the opportunity to show it to some clients here in Australia, I always hoped that they wouldn't buy it, because in reality I don't want to sell it, because he's Roman, he's coming from Auntie Julie, he's coming from Emmanuel, he's my connection in direct line with him. And so I hope to be able to buy from my Auntie Julie so that I can keep it, because it's such an extraordinary object. And the fact that he survived all these centuries basically intact is extraordinary. And of course, feel free to make me an offer if you find this one of interest. But for now, it's just a matter of dropping a like, dropping me a comment. And if you find this content interesting, don't forget to subscribe. And what happened to our dear Emanuele? Well, they found him 15 years ago, dead in the morning at his desk, surrounded by books and with a manuscript open where his head had collapsed and they still have the light on. What a wonderful way to go for this most incredible character. And sometimes when you reach a certain age, you feel like, oh, like for instance, I wish I could ask my grandfather a lot of questions about the war, World War II. I wish I asked some other characters what happened when they were young. And in the case of Emanuele, I wish I could tell him what was he like, who are these people. Because through my mom, I only got exposure to the top part. I couldn't see deep inside, but I had an opportunity to look, and I felt that that underworld, where there is a lot of dirty money, there is also real love from collectors who can only trade among themselves because they are not supposed to own stuff that they have in that collection. And some of these items, if they are bulking, like Roman statues, in some cases could even be of Greek statues, they use them as pawn to negotiate with the Italian state a reduction on the tax bill when they're preparing for, the next generation. So they can strike a deal and they can drop entire collection, and items can be part of the national collection of Italy, and they don't get to pay inheritance tax. That is what you have to do in Italy. And certainly they don't get confiscated because you are not supposed to own them. And in fact, anything that is considered of antiquity in Italy, you never own it, really. And this is the story of the golden necklace from the Roman Empire and my personal interaction with Emanuele that I got to see and spend time with my mom many times. And since that afternoon, I was always fascinated by him. But Emanuele never had any interest in me. He had no interest when I was 10 years old, no interest when I was 15, no interest when I was in my 20s, because he lived in his world. And anything that could not contribute to his world was just a distraction that would take zero of his time. But I remember visiting his home in the center of Rome, and he had a Picasso, he had a Magritte, he had a Mondrian, he had a statue of Henry Moore. Incredible stuff. And also I remember how he had to borrow money from my mom, and how my mom never said no to Emanuele when he asked for money. And Emanuele knew that when he was in trouble, she could come to my mom. And my mom, if she didn't have the money, she would ask the money to my dad. And my dad, that was like proper, more corporate, sort of liberal, but quite conservative. He was somebody very quick to label people as a cretino, an imbecile. And of all the people that we dealt with, many people got called a cretino, an imbecile, by my late father. But there were people, including like Emanuele, that with my greatest surprise had a sort of admiration of my father for the culture, for the knowledge, for what they were doing. And my dad could see beyond the fact that they were not part of a proper business, a proper family, a proper way to present themselves. They could find themselves desperate for cash. They were sort of inconceivable for my father. But in the case of this character, including Emanuele, my dad himself never flinched, because he recognized that he was like a unique character. And so, wherever you are, caro Emanuele, I say farewell to you, and I hope to be able to buy from Auntie Julie the necklace that you gave her back when she was young and beautiful.